Thank you for joining us today. Would you care to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about Black History Walks?
Yeah, my name's Tony Moore from Black History Walks. We organise walks, talks and films on the Black History in London. We have about 16 different walks in North, East, South and West. Elephant Castle, Notting Hill, the City of London, St Paul's Bank, Hackney, Mayfair, Regent's Canal. It's Black History everywhere. We also put on talks, so we have regular public discussions or presentations on Black history, sometimes online, but more often not physical in museums, art galleries, lecture theatres, which can cover anything from warrior queens of the 16th century to the role of the IMF in the development of the so-called third world. And other than that, we also raise funds to put up plaques to famous Black people, or people who should be famous, I should say. We actually just did one to Phyllis Wheatley, the world famous poet. And that one is actually in the city of London. And that we did about 3 years ago. But what we do is actually identify these locations, raise the funds for an individual, and then put the plaque to recognize that person for the rest of history, in effect. Other than that, we got 2 books out. One is called Black History Walks Volume 1 by me. And it's all about the Black history in London streets. This is volume 1 of about maybe 7 volumes. And this covers Westminster and Southwark, religion, politics, war, ancient civilizations, a whole bunch of different stuff is in this one book. We also have a GCSE exam textbook. It's called Pearson History Book, and it's based on Notting Hill walks. So we took our Notting Hill walk and made that into an exam textbook, which has now been used in schools. And for the first time, kids are now studying about Boxand Partners, Susu, the Mangrove Line, the Blackman's Day of Action, Bristol Bus Boycott, Frank Critchlow, Black Business Success, Shabeens, a whole bunch of stuff they never heard about before, right?
It's really interesting that you say that it's become part of the curriculum in schools. Like, I made a documentary a long time ago on the 30th anniversary of the New Cross fire and interviewed one of the daughters of one of the victims of the fire. And she'd gone to school at the school Addie and Stanhope. I mean, I don't mean to name check it, but it's right across the road. And she was saying that they'd never mentioned it. Now, I'm a governor at a local school now, and I went to an anti-racism event, and there was somebody, lo and behold, there was somebody from Addie and Stanhope, but it took all of that stuff for 2020 for them to acknowledge this tragedy. It was on their doorstep that was so seminal for the story of Black history in this country. And it's really interesting that you've been, like you say, you've been going for 16 years. Do you think there's enough awareness of the great role that Black history has played in the story of this country?
100% no, definitely not. And I'll give an example in that. You mentioned the Black People's Day of Action, that was 81, massive march for basically for equal rights and rights in this country. And that march was not on our curriculum in this country until about maybe 5 years ago, if that, I would say, because it's definitely on it in my book, that Pearson book. But the point would be is that if you went to school, you would be learning about the March on Washington, which was for equality and justice, back in America in 1963. You'll learn that chapter and verse, primary school, secondary school, in America, but you're not learning about the march that took place in this country anywhere, right? So how does it even make sense? You're going to learn about a march for equality and justice in America in 63, but you're in London and you don't know, as you just said, you don't know nothing about what took place here in 81 because of, the pressure on Black people here and the fact that people are getting burned to death and the police were taking it seriously, media's ignoring, etc. And that by itself illustrates how perverse the system is, that we don't get told what's happening here. That affects us to this very day. That's just one example. In fact, in my book, the biggest chapter is this chapter here. I did a comparative timeline between Black British civil rights and Black American civil rights. And that's the biggest chapter in the book, because I know from doing these walks all this time that people will come on the walk, they will know about Rosa Parks, they'll know about Luther King, but they won't know about John LaRose or Frank Critchlow or Mark Darcus Howe. They will not know those names or what they were doing. And I found it a bit perverse. So when we do the walks, we address this lack of British history and we compare what people know here about America and ask them, well, how come you know all about Montgomery bus boycott in 55 and not about the Bristol bus boycott in England in 63?
Now, could you tell me a little bit about your walk through the city of London? What might someone expect when going on one of those?
Well, they can expect it for a fact, because what happens is that people will come on that walk that were in that area. In the 2 hours of walk last, their heads will expand, they'll be blown, they can't believe what they're hearing, and they're freaking out, believe it or knowing that they were working there for 5, 10, 20 years, etc. but never had no idea that the Bank of England was involved in slavery, number one, or that Lloyd's Insurance slavery, number two, or that there was a whole kind of Bank of England governor, what's his name again now? Humphrey Morris, who was actually funding slave ships. He was building slave ships at Deptford, sending those slave ships to the Caribbean. Then the pirates hijacked the slave ships, freed the enslaved people. Then black people became black pirates in the Caribbean, real pirates in Dunbar, real pirates in the Caribbean were black, right? And actually, was the same ship he built was called the Wither Galley, right? This ship was hijacked by pirates. They released the African captives. And on that slave ship, there's a whole bunch of gold, which the pirates then had. That ship was then sunk in a massive shipwreck. And then about 150 years later, they actually discovered the shipwreck and all the very finely, highly crafted African gold on board the shipwreck. And that goes on display in some museum in Nantucket. So, I mean, there's all that history there and more than I can even squeeze in comments. It's just loads.
I'm sure the book itself will be a way of locating it in place. Because I guess one of the beautiful things about a walking tour is it really puts into effect that the streets that we walk on now, 300 years ago, were places of significance in a completely different world with rules and stories that were the opposite of what we tell ourselves is the story of this country, or many people will tell themselves is the story of this country.
There's a venue called the Jamaica Wine House. Used to be called the Jamaica Coffee House. And that coffee house back in the 1800s was a place where they put up signs about escaped Africans. So all the runaways or freedom seekers who had run away from their so-called masters, they'd have a sign saying, this black man, 6 foot tall, dark skin, etc., is on the run. If you see him, bring him to this place in the city, by the way, bring him to Fenner Street or bring him to Cheapside, because if you bring him there, you will get a reward of 10 guineas, etc. So this is taking place right there where people having their cappuccinos now, that you had all these kind of runaways, freedom seekers who are fighting the system, and there was slave masters trying to track them down and re-enslave them. The history is there, but that's not part of it. If you do the regular tours there, they don't mention this kind of history. We actually have 2 walks there. We have a walk called St. Paul's Bank Walk, which is between St. Paul's and Bank. And we have another walk called Fighting the Slave Master. Now, this walk is all about the black people who mashed up, fought for the slave master, as well as the massive amount of money that was made from slavery, which ends up in the city and still to this very day, right? So that's what that's about.
We've known these things for a long time, right? Like, this historical information has been abroad. It's been available for a long time. But it took certain momentum from certain historical events to revivify it. So I guess I'm asking, what do you think should be done to commemorate these stories that isn't done? Or what do you think should be done to tell the stories of those who've done wrong in the past, enslavers?
Well, to tell the stories, one thing we're doing is doing these walking tours for a fact. That's what we're doing. We're telling stories from our perspective. So walking tours is one way. Presentations is another way. We do that all the time anyhow. Doing, documentation with your books like this one right here, Black History 21, that's another way of doing it. And when it comes to physical memorials to the slave owners, as far as I'm concerned, lick them all down. Because I can still talk about their racist slave master history without having a big old statue of them on a pedestal that I'm supposed to look up to. I can do that quite easily. Think about World War II. There's no statues in London to Adolf Hitler or Goebbels or Goring, but we talk about them all the time. In fact, there's no statue to Jack the Ripper either, right? But there's a whole bunch of history about Jack the Ripper without any kind of physical representation. So I can't understand why there's going to be a big 25-foot statue of some mass murdering, racist, rapist, psychopath on a pedestal that I should look up to, who was enslaving, kidnapping, torturing hundreds of thousands or millions of black people. That to me makes no sense. And they shouldn't be there in the first place. Far less they should be kept there. So I don't feel there should be those statues in situ. They should be taken down and replaced with statues about possibly the enslaved, or at least tell the truth. Look, if you can have a statue about some slave master, tell the truth about who he is, like where he got money from, and why he's there. So when it comes to, what's that guy's name now? He's in the Guildhall, William Bedford. Okay, say, look, this is a Jamaican slave owner, or something like, what's it, 3,000 enslaved people, and he tortured them, kidnapped them, abused them to make himself the wealthiest man in the country. That's his story. Boom, end of story. So if you can do that, fair enough. If you're not to tell the truth, get rid of him.
I'm running a launch event for this on the 19th of February at the Ironmongers, which has a statue of Beckford as well, because he was a master of the Ironmongers. And it's interesting that livery company is clearly trying to grasp with that. I think they're trying to acknowledge the wrongs of the past and see what they can do to make a positive future that relates to that.
I mean, look, any slave master, slave owner was a mass murderer. By definition, end of story, done. What can one say?
Do you feel that the progress we made in terms of getting things into the curriculum, like you now have got that book, where do we go from there?
That progress is made on about 70 years of struggle, long before when I was in short pants, I was doing this before I was even on the scene, right? Talking about people like Len Garrison, John LaRose, talking about Dame Justin Barrett, a whole bunch of people was saying we should have this history about Britain in British history, as opposed to like it's nothing to do with us, which is how it's kind of portrayed, right? The door's been pushed on for a very long time, and George Floyd helped to fling it open. And after that situation, there was a good deal of progress in certain areas. But as always happens, is that once you get some progress, after a couple of years, you get some backtracking, right? So people who said we're going to do this, that, and the other, 2 years, 3 years down the line, they've done something, but not as much as they said it was going to do. You could see that for yourself. It's not anything new that tell a secret about. We have to kind of be aware of that fact and then push the boundaries again.
Well, it's been really informative talking to you. I'm going to ask, what can we expect from Black History Walks in the remainder of 2024?
We're going to have a number of different unusual events. So we have a Black History River Cruise over Thames, which goes from Temple to Greenwich and Vauxhall, 3 hours long. We show people the back on the River Thames, which is full of, ancient African history, but also more modern history. And we also have a bit of entertainment on board, and that is a very significant unusual event. We have a new cruise, slower cruise on the canal. So we have a Regent's Canal cruise on the canal, right? On a narrowboat, which also explores and explains the Black history on the canal itself. We have a walk on the canal. We also have a walk in Mayfair. So Mayfair is a posh, bougie, wealthy area full of Black history. I mean, like, that's another 2-hour walk, and we go through a whole bunch of ancient African history right up to kind of modern times. Talk about music, singing, dancing, mineral wealth. There's a bunch of stuff in there. So what's happening this year is more of the same. Plus, actually, we'll be doing some more book launches, as well as Volume 2 should come out maybe this year, possibly. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, a bunch of stuff.